Eliza Tilly set her copybook on the Crowell porch rail and counted chairs as she would pupils, 12 set in 2 neat ranks, the 13th dragged to the stoop for Dinah's stitching basket. Cicadas kept time in the pines. Thunder paced a county off, never deciding. She noted the river's stage, with a schoolma'am's reflex, 2 hands below the ferry piling's moss line, rope dark but not dripping, and the wind, none, as sure as a rule. Inside, the table had been laid with domestic precision, 4 loaves cooling on the sill, a crock of beans sweating politely under its cloth. The Crowell boys came in by 2s from the south field, shirts stuck to their backs, grinning as if grins were work they meant to finish. Dinah moved among them, small and exact, laying spoons along the table edge, the way a clerk lays coin. 1, 2, 12. She kept her house ledger open on the corner near the salt, a pencil stuck in the stitching of the binding where a ribbon would be on a richer book. Eliza's eye went to it, as it will to any book left where it may be read, and then away. A fiddle started cautious and got its courage. Feet found the porch boards with the hush thud of men who mean no harm to wood. Eliza took small measurements that give a day its sense. Lane dust lifted to the ankle only, no higher. Kettle steam at a steady thread. Shadows on the north fence longer by a shoe than yesterday. She wrote none of it, knowing she could carry it whole to the school ledger at home, where weather, attendance, and river kept equal company. When the thunder drew a breath that sounded nearer than it was, Saul Pritchard's ferry bell knocked upriver, 1 clean note, though the rope hung slack and the pilings kept their silt. Eliza tipped her head to fix the direction. No wind to carry it, and yet there the bell had travelled, bright as a coin skimmed on water. She did not put that in any column. Some figures asked to be kept in the mouth until they agree to behave. The boys washed at the pump and came to table by habit more than invitation. Dinah pressed water from her rag, pinned a stray curl behind her ear, and looked once down the lane as if hearing a sum being done where no slate should be. Hoofbeats arrived out of the dust, collected, and held. Eliza counted under her breath, because counting has a way of making trouble smaller. 1, 2, 5 by the ear, then 8. The beats ceased not at the yard, but short of it, as if a hand had found the throat of sound and squeezed. They did not call out. Men who respect a place make talk enough to alert a dog. No dog barked. The silence lay on the beans like another cloth. Eliza stepped to the porch edge as far as a guest might, and the youngest Crowell, Tom, 16, by her roll, set his palm on the table, felt the grain as if it could tell him hours. Dinah closed the ledger with 2 fingers and slid it under the folded tablecloth without looking at it, a gesture so practiced it must have more than one use. Cicadas hushed and started again in the pines. Thunder wrote its careful line and withdrew. Eliza put her hand on the porch post, felt pitch-tacky, a still had been fired somewhere lately, or a wagon with resin barrels had scraped by. She sniffed once. Turpentine smoke, faint, where no distillery lay, within her usual map. She filed it beside the bell, not touching it with words. Saul's ferry rope lifted a finger's width and settled, though no skiff passed, and the river kept its lack of current, like a tired man holding still to keep his breath. Eliza measured the ropes wet in her head. None measured the pilings, 2 hands below moss, and made herself content with those figures. The fiddle faltered and then held. The Crowell boys stood, not by order, but by that family sense that moves a body into readiness without asking whose idea it was. Dinah took up the stitching basket and did not stitch. She placed it on the 13th chair, as if reserving a seat for arithmetic. Eliza reached for her copybook and found her fingers steadier than her stomach. "Shall I bless?" she asked the way she would in school when the minister was late. Dinah's mouth made a line. "If you will," she said, eyes not leaving the lane. Eliza bowed her head and spoke the short grace she used for children, each word small and serviceable, not designed to carry in a wind. The bell came again, muted now, as if a hand had been laid to bronze to teach it modesty. The lane dust rose to the height of a boot and stilled. She lifted her head and found every face at table turned to the same place beyond the sycamore, not frightened yet exactly, but already holding its breath. The hoofbeats stopped, as if someone had counted to a number and agreed it would do. Hoofbeats had stopped, as if counted. Eliza kept one hand on the porch post, the pitch tacky under her palm, and watched 8 riders sort themselves in the lane without calling out. The river's rope lay slack, 2 hands below moss on the pilings. Cicadas paused and resumed with the discipline of a school bell. She put those figures in order in her head, the way she settled a rowdy slate of sums before recitation. The lead rider dismounted with a care that said, "Officer, not neighbor." He wore dust like a habit, and gloves too clean for the road. "Captain Ephraim read, by the provost's office," he said, not loud. He produced a folded document from a leather case and held it so only Dinah could read without stepping off her own ground. Eliza noted the company's size: 8 saddles, 2 carbines in scabbards, 1 bedroll torn and mended with twine, and set it beside the single page, bearing authority enough, it seemed, to remove 12 men from supper. Dinah wiped her fingers on her apron before she took the paper. Even now, she would not stain a thing that claimed to be official. "My boys are farmhands," she said, voice mild as boiling beans. "Their father wrote to the county concerning exemptions. I have letters." She tapped the tablecloth where the house ledger lived beneath. Red nodded that small nod men keep for mothers and reached into his case again. "This supersedes," he said, and offered nothing else. Eliza drew the porch chair forward an inch with her toe so she might set the copybook steady on her knee. She wrote the hour, by shadows just before 7, the wind, none, and the river stage, as if attendance could shield anyone from arithmetic gone cruel. Tom Crowell stood behind Dinah, 16 by her roll, hands already learned to match the grain of wood. His brothers held still the way a field holds after a wind. Red read from the paper in the tone of a clerk who knows the cost of ink. Names fell, first to last, 12 of them. The familiar cadence of Eliza's morning roll, altered by distance and duty. When he finished, he lifted his chin toward the yard, as if expecting the men to step forward the way scholars do for copy work. No one moved. Somewhere upriver, the ferry bell gave one uncertain knock against the hush, as if a hand had brushed bronze with more courtesy than intention. Rain began in deciding drops, 3 on the step, 5 on the lane dust, then a patter on the sycamore leaves that measured itself like exact handwriting. Eliza took the paper when Dinah held it for her glance. The seal, red wax, impressed with a wheel and star, sat proper on the fold. She checked dates, signatures, the county's name spelled without error, the way a teacher scans a line for the one letter a child never remembers to bend. The handwriting, a practiced round, belonged to someone who had never mended harness in his life. The column of riders, 8, did not match the column of names. 12, a small thing, but small things often prove the sum. Dinah laid a bundle of letters on the table, stitched across the top with blue thread, the father's hand thin, patient. "Filed, received, and returned stamped," she said, and showed the county mark, a pine-stamped blind into paper. Red's glove touched the packet and paused only long enough to be polite. "The war has needs that exceed Clark's," he said. He set the letters aside with care, as if the gentleness could be mistaken for mercy. Eliza tracked small tells. A horse's ear turned back, the restless shift of a boot heel in stirrup, how the men held their faces blank around the smell of beans. The rain made darker stars in the dust where drops struck and vanished, not yet enough to bind anything together. She wrote weather, commencing, then slipped the pencil back into the copybook's spine and stepped to the edge of the porch so she might read the seal again under honest light. Red's deputy unfurled a length of cord as if measuring a package. Two of the older Crowell boys glanced once at their mother and then away, palms flat on their thighs to hold them from any use. Eliza lifted the page with the pinch she reserved for fragile maps. The wax seal shed a tiny flake where the fold's edge bit it. The rain put a freckle beside. She thought of Saul Pritchard's chalk tally and how easily a number leaves a board when wet. "Captain," she said, "your seal," and stopped because the bell upriver spoke again, with no wind to excuse it. Red turned half his face toward the sound and then back, impatience folded smooth. He held out his hand for the paper. A drop found his glove, struck, slid. The red wax took the shine like fruit skin under a thumb. Eliza watched as the crisp wheel and star blurred where water moved through it, the impression fattening into color with no authority left in it at all. The rain had fattened the provost seal to useless fruit. By night, Eliza climbed the bluff above the Crowell landing and counted the river's facts. Rope slack, 2 hands below the moss line, no wind to move a skiff, fog ribboned low like muslin hung to dry. Cicadas had given the hour over to frogs. The thunder had withdrawn to rumor. She kept her copybook shut. Ink misbehaves in damp, and used her mouth to hold numbers. Lanterns kindled at the Crowell shore. 3, then 5, then a 6th held high for pride or order. Eliza stood 30-odd feet above the landing, far enough to be uninvited, near enough to count. 12 shapes gathered in a patience that meant they had agreed among themselves before she came. Saul Pritchard unlooped the ferry rope and tested the lay with 2 hands. The sound of wet hemp in a pulley carries clean in fog. He chalked a mark on his slate board with the stub he kept on a thong. 1 neat stroke, no flourish. She saw his hand lift a second time and hold, waiting for the extra detail to declare itself. Red's men had not shown, or had the sense to keep back. The brothers, loaded by 2s, practiced the way schoolboys mount a recitation, shoulder to shoulder, 2 beats between each pair. Eliza counted in their steps, 2, 4, 6, and found herself setting them in her head like desks in a room. The fog took their faces and left them as the sort of silhouettes a teacher draws to show posture. Saul hung the lantern on the bowpost, a sensible low to find water with. Another lamp, lower still, rode not on the boat at all, but along the rope itself, a foxfire smear that kept its place as if tied to the night. The bell knocked once, timid, as though corrected mid-syllable, and went shy. No wind carried it. The skiff pushed off, a hush in the water as the board settled. Saul braced, pulled hand over hand along the line, shoulders making the reliable geometry Eliza trusted in men who handled tools. She marked the river's answer, a wake that behaved, then hesitated, as if the current had remembered a different lesson and taken it. She watched the chalkboard tilt, as Saul wrote again, 1 for the load, 1 for the hour. He tucked the slate under the thwart with the thrift of a man who has lost things and taught himself not to. The fog ribbon took the ferry, like paper takes a pressed fern, holding the shape without granting detail. Eliza counted the lamp swings, 14, then 9, then none, merely a bank of white that thought about being a shore. On the far side, where the road strikes the cane, no answering lantern showed. The rope carried tension, yes, but not in pulses any woman who sewed could call honest. Eliza set her palm to the bluff cedar and felt sap-tacky, though no axe had been near. The turpentine still beyond the pines had breathed out again, unasked. She tasted smoke and silt, a thin bitterness that never printed itself properly in a school ledger. She strained for figures. The bell did not announce a landing. Frogs took up a brief quarrel and dropped it. Her ear hauled up a small, practical detail. The ferry's plank, rapped twice, as if set to and not to shore, the sort of clatter a child makes on a floor when he means for his mother to think he has gone to bed. She watched for Saul's lamp to rise on the opposite bank, a lift, a swing, and wrote the absence inside herself as carefully as she would any presence. Minutes went unreasonably tall. The rope gave, then took, then steadied, as if looped around something that had learned to behave like a post. Eliza counted to 60 twice and let the third set go wide. Fog unseamed a little, then stitched itself again. When sound came, it came from water itself, not shore, not rope. The hurrying whisper of a wake, returning without the boat that made it. The ferry slid into view beneath her perch, empty as a pew on market day. Lanterns still lit on the bow, and chalkboard damp where fog had held it. Saul was not at the line. No figures stood to disembark. The skiff kissed its own landing, with the shy satisfaction of habit, and did not call out. A hat brim, black and sensible, rode in eddy beside the pilings, turned once and laid itself against the moss, like a hand that had come home without its arm. At first light, Eliza took the river's measure. Rope slack, 2 hands below the moss line, fog gone to damp breath along the low cane, and set the facts in her throat where ink cannot run. The ferry lay where it had nosed itself in the night, lantern spent, chalkboard wet as bread heel. Saul's hat brim had lodged against the piling like a polite visitor. Frogs had yielded the hour back to birds. No bells spoke. She wrote none of it. She called instead for boys old enough to follow a line and young enough to think lines can be followed. They met at the Crowell gate with poles and twine. Eliza marked a grid on her copypaper, rods by rods, then cut the day into it. From the landing to the turpentine still, she said. 2 files abreast. Call your fines. Dinah stood in the yard, with the house ledger pressed flat under her palm, as one steadies a book when the table shakes. Red's 8 men kept off, making the shape of usefulness at a distance. The weather held undecided. A thin milk sun, the color of old paper. Eliza set her heel at the head of the lane and led. They walked by count. 20 paces, mark, 20 more, mark. The cane took their clothing, with domestic insistence. At the first low place, a boy held up a length of grass with a thread of tar ribboned through it. Eliza touched the tack and found not the sweet of roof pitch, but the sour of ship rope. She dropped it into her apron pocket and said nothing. A jay scolded twice and then kept counsel. The turpentine still showed itself in pieces before it consented to be a hole, a pit black as a pupil, a sloped trench where resin once spilled into a barrel now gone. Pine knots stacked like a clerk's bad intentions. The ground wore drips the size of pennies, cured brown at their lips and fresh amber beneath where last night's rain had worried them. She laid her hand close and felt no heat. She listened and heard a quiet tick, the way cooling pans talk when bread comes out too soon. No fire, she said to the boys, because children must learn the grammar of fact before they are told the rhetoric. Tracks began shy and then gathered. 12 boot pairs and a 13th, whose heels bit deeper when the ground turned to gum. Eliza set her pole across one compressed patch and read the measure the way a teacher reads a slate. 13 widths, yes. Then the pattern split, 4 slanting for the creek bend, 8 toward the pine ridge, 1 holding center as if it took a line from something nobody else could see. Call them, she said, and the boys gave their numbers back in nervous sequence, satisfied by the competence of their own mouths. By a lightning-stuck stump, she found fibers, rope-teased, damp enough to keep shape. She rolled them between thumb and forefinger, felt the grit of river in it, and put them with the tar thread. At the stump's base, something roared the soil, a flurry of heel scuffs that ended in a long, smooth drag like furniture moved by men who had not agreed about where it belongs. The drag narrowed where it met a low runnel and dissolved under water that did not deserve the name. Eliza set her boot on the last shore mark and looked across the not-quite mirror, seeing the same bank made into a lie by reflection. "Ma'am," one of the boys called from the ridgeline. She climbed the rise, counted breath by tens. On the flat of a cut pine knot stump, sap bled dark from fresh gouges. The Crowell initials set in a ring, 12 letters, tidy, edges still weeping amber. Eliza rubbed her pencil over paper held to the cuts and took their measure onto the sheet. The letters would reverse in the rubbing, but fact does not mind a mirror if kept honest. Beside the ring, a small cross had been nicked in, casual, an afterthought or a clerk's flourish. She did not like it. Red appeared at the edge of their work with one deputy, faces composed to be read as help. "You will leave the barons to my men," he said, courteous. "There are matters of war." Eliza kept her place and the copybook between them. "There are matters of numbers," she said back, not louder. She held up the rubbing. He did not take it. His gloves were new again. They worked the grid until noon. The sun pressed a hum out of the pines. Insects made a civilian's music nobody could pretend was martial. Eliza found, near a roughed patch where wagon wheels should have scored and had not, a button from a work shirt brassed at the rim by sweat and time. She set it with the rope and tar in her pocket and marked the place on her paper with an X that stood for here and not for treasure. When the boys flagged, she released them 2 and 2 with errands that ended at home. She returned by the still to make one last circle. The pitch in the trench had taken the day's heat and gave it back in miserly ticks. No ash lay fresh. No track crossed the stove stone since rain. Yet as she turned to the path, the catchpan gave a small, deliberate crackle, the sound a fire makes when it remembers itself without flame. By afternoon, the milk sun had thinned. Eliza took the river's measure again. Rope slack, 2 hands below the moss line, a cat's paw breeze that moved only the cane, and set her copybook on an upended crate. The landing had been made into a court by arrangement rather than law. 3 nail kegs for a bench, 2 crates for witness and clerk, Captain Red's leather case set where all could see it. Dinah stood near the ferry post with her house ledger under her palm as ballast. Boys from the morning grid kept to the sycamore's shade, hats in their hands, the way they'd learned for chapel. Red unrolled his paper with a precision that asked to be watched. The rain of last night had dried it in pocks. The seal wore a new skin of varnish, wheel and star crisp again. Though Eliza could still see where water had fattened it and left the edge dull. By this, 12 men were transferred at the Crowell place to my charge, he said, voice Clark flat. He named the brothers, let the syllables fall like fence rails, then looked to the river as if expecting the water to nod. Eliza timed each sentence by the ferry bell that did not ring. She wrote the hour, 2:10 by her watch, though she trusted shadows more, and the weather, breeze light, no thunder. Then added small truth. Saul missing at dawn. Ferry returned empty. She kept the rope fibers and tar thread in her apron pocket, the brass button wrapped in a corner of handkerchief, the stump rubbing pressed in the copybook's back, where her scholars' absences ordinarily lived. Evidence earned its keep by being ready, not dramatic. They called the first witness, a mill hand who had seen lanterns go down to the landing, and the second, a cane farmer who had heard the bell once and then shy. Each spoke as men do when they know the cost of gossip and the cost of silence. Eliza noted their distances and angles, how many steps to the bluff, how fog had behaved in their recollection, gave their words, rods, and hands. Red nodded, unhelped by his gloves. Bring Saul, Red said at last, as if asking for a tool. The ferryman came from the sycamore line with his shoulders set to honest work. His chalkboard hung on its thong, slate edge abraded smooth by years of pockets, the stub of chalk wrapped in wax paper against damp. He sat the board in his lap and folded his big hands together until told. Tell what you did, Red said. Saul told it in the grammar of a riverman. Unloop the rope. Set the lamp low, loaded by twos, sir. As they do, he named no names. He counted instead, 12 men, no horses, weight even, wake decent. Halfway, the pull went queer a spell. Rope had the feel of a live thing that wants to be a post. He had written one stroke for the load and one for the hour. Eliza saw them on the slate, straight, stout, a clerk's twos without vanity. She asked with her teacher's voice for the minute mark. Saul pointed with 2 fingers to the chalk. Near 11 by my usual. Fog set, no bell on the far side. Eliza felt the past settle in its chair. She wrote Saul, 10:50 to 11, and then a line beside it. River stage then, 2 hands under moss, wind, none. She added the grid note from morning, drag marks at the runnel, stump initials fresh, and stopped her pencil because she had learned the hard way that a page too full convinces no one. Red laid his paper flat and placed one clean glove at either top corner, a bookkeeper's pin. Our patrol reached your far bank at the 10th hour, he said. No ferry. No men. We returned upriver to the road. His deputy produced a small brass timepiece and held it open like a sacrament. Eliza watched the second hand hesitate at the 12 and then stutter on, the way poor workmanship betrays itself when asked to be evidence. Your stage marks will say otherwise, Eliza said, more to the river than the captain. She pointed with her pencil to the pilings. Drop since dusk. 1 hand only. No headwind, no flood. A crossing at 10 leaves a wake that shows at 10. Dinah did not look away from her ledger, but Eliza felt the ledger's weight increase under that still palm, as if numbers had put on meat. Red did not redden. Some men are spared that honest tell. I have the county's authority, he said, as though the sentence could be measured and found exact. I have men who did not sleep. He looked at Saul's chalkboard without bending to it. Fetch me your tally for the week, he added, careless, as if asking a boy for copy work. Saul stood in the careful way men stand when their knees have made a contract with the rest of them. Boards kept in the ferry shed, sir, he said, dry corner. He lifted the slate under his arm with a father's touch. The river made its low talk against the pilings. The breeze failed and came back meaner for the pause. Eliza logged request, weekly tally, custody to shift, and then wrote bell, silent. Saul set off along the rope walk with the plain patience of a man who knows where all his tools live. Red glanced at his deputy, then at the varnish seal. A jay scolded once in the sycamore and lost the point. Saul turned the shed corner and was gone into a square of shade that kept its shape too well. Minutes arranged themselves and sat. The ferry rope lifted a finger's width and settled. Eliza counted to 60 twice, then closed her copybook so as not to show the tremor in her hand. Saul did not come back. Saul had gone for his weekly tally and not returned. By evening, Eliza walked the barrens again, with her copybook shut against damp and the day's figures set orderly in her mouth. The rain that had freckled Captain Red's seal had stalled to ere you could fold. The river lay 2 hands below the moss now, not one, a fall she had not granted it leave to take. Cicadas tried evening and failed. Frogs would not yet oblige. She kept to rods and marks, because numbers are the last gate a mind may shut. The turpentine still received her without smoke, only that miser's ticking along the pitch lip, as if heat were a debt paid slowly. She took the path she had laid in mourning. The runnel with its drag mark dissolved to mirror. The lightning-stuck stump where rope fibers had kept grit, and the pine knot round whose face she had rubbed for the 12 tidy initials. The sap there bled darker now, slow tears thickened by day. She took out the rubbing and fitted it to the cut like a bandage turned clean side down. The reversed letters matched their wounds. She set the copy paper aside and pried gently at the stump's edge with her pencil's ferrule. The bark lifted a thumb's breadth. Beneath, fresh-cut notches ran in a clerk's hand around the stump's rim. Short strokes counted in 4 and 1s, 12 gatherings, then a 13th cluster with a cross nicked through as if someone had fixed a sum after the slate bell rang. It was not the proud ring of carved initials, but a ledger of strokes, the way mill hands keep cords of wood, the way a ferryman keeps days, fat and lean. She pressed another sheet and took that count to paper, the graphite dark and grain taking it clean. She found, set in pitch at the stump's north edge, a length of tarred twine pulled flat and buried by a thumb. She teased it free with care. It came away with grit and a smell that belonged to ship decks and not to inland stands of pine. She folded it into her handkerchief beside the brass shirt button and wrote, under her breath so the words would keep their posture, twine, tarred, custody, Eliza, stump tally, 12 plus cross, custody, rubbing. Evidence behaved better when told where it lived. From the ridge, the river showed itself in long darks. Between cane heads, she saw Saul's shed as a square cut from late light. No motion at its mouth, no sound of board against post. She went that way, counting paces, 40, then 90, then the measure of a schoolroom from door to back slate. The shed kept its tools, like a decent man keeps his temper, orderly, reluctant. On the wall, a clean rectangle marked where the weekly tally board should have hung. The outline was paler wood, dust saved from fingers by habit. On the shelf below, a scrap of wax paper lay creased, chalk crumbs caught in its folds like salt. She slid the paper into her copybook with 2 fingers, as if it were a wing. The ferry rope, stretched a hand lower on its pilings, lay with a dead snake's patience. Eliza set her palm to a post and felt not damp, not heat, but the mildness of something that had worked under strain, and now rested only because work had changed its name. She recorded the stage with care. Pilings, 2 hands under moss, dropped by 1 hand since noon. She paused because certainty requires a breath. The bell gave no sound, and yet her molars found bronze, a taste like old coins kept in a child's mouth too long. She tried the far bank with her schoolroom eye. No lantern. The cane made its small grammar in a favoring breeze. The river's skin lifted in cat's paws where no wind walked. At the landing, Dinah's figure was a dark thread at the edge of the yard. She held still, the house ledger against her breast, as if weight itself could tell the hour her boys would come up the road and turn into her gate. Red kept to the sycamore's shade with 2 men, their faces set to administrative weather. Their horses did not care for the ferry rope and turned their heads away when it moved, though no hand moved it. Eliza returned to the stump and read again the rim of strokes. 12 counted, the cross crowning a 13th, an aftermark, impatient or exact. She thought of Saul's missing board and the slate's weekly ghost on the shed wall. She thought of the varnished seal that had been something truer when it was smudged. She did not give any of these thoughts words. She put them where the mouth keeps sums it must carry without breaking. The frogs found their part at last. A heron rose from the shallows with the indifference of an officer, slow wing beats that argued with nothing. Eliza walked down to the pilings and stood where a mother would stand if she meant to see a son first and not last. The river breathed out. Silt slid from the moss line like a cuff unrolled. In that small lowering, the black gave up a glint, the blunt curve of iron set in clay, not drift, not root, a ring or link where a ring should never be. She marked the place with her heel and did not call for anyone at all. By August, the river had forgotten rain. Eliza measured the pilings at mid-morning, moss line high above a wrist, and 2 hands again, wood bleached where water once kept it honest. The ferry rope lay in a languid curve, not slack so much as bored. Cicadas filled the hours with hard industry. The turpentine still sat the way a bad thought sits, cold, exact, refusing to rot. She carried no boys now, no grid, only her copybook and the rubbed sheet of initials, 12 letters reversed and faithful. Dry took the cane first, then the mud. At the far bank, black gave way to a seam of iron. Eliza crossed above the bluff where the path keeps its sense and came down in small steps, testing each clay shelf the way a school marm tests a boy's figure. A foot from the water, she saw it clean, a short chain link arched from silt like a collarbone. She set her heel beside, marked the distance to the ferry post, 37 paces, and wrote it with the neatness that survives heat. 2 more links lay near, not in a regular run, but as if thrown from a small hand. Hollis, the county's new man in a round hat, arrived with 2 clerks and a day's worth of patience. An inventory, he said, to close the file. He had the tone of a mercantile, not a court. The clerks kept their pencils sharp and their faces obliging. They cut the chain pieces loose without ceremony and set them on a folded sack. Iron printed its cool through burlap. One clerk read from a printed schedule. Unknown remains, none. Articles recovered, 3 links, 1 nail, sundry scrap, and waited for a witness. Eliza signed with the practice stroke that keeps a school open. She offered the brassed button, the tarred twine, the wax paper with chalk grit, each wrapped in its corner. Custody, she said, notes within. Hollis thanked her as if she had brought pound cake. He turned the button in his fingers, saw Sweat's halo, set it down. He held the twine to his nose and did not comment. "We will append," he said, a word that tries to be kind to what it cannot use. Red did not come. A broadsheet from Tuscaloosa said promotion, in letters that made sport of distance. Dinah kept to Sundays, 12 places set, knives caught from rust by flour rub, cloth laid the way a woman lays hope, flat, uncreased, exact. At church she sang in a quiet that makes neighbors behave themselves. The ledger lay under her hymn, heavy as a child. Eliza saw the same line in her face that drought makes in a field, unarguable, requiring work, admitting no audience. Saul's shed held on the wall the pale rectangle where the weekly tally board had been. Eliza stood there once and made the gesture a teacher makes before a slate. Fingertips raised, the ghost of chalk dust trusted to appear. It did not. She wrote instead, the hour, the air, the dropped river stage day by day until numbers formed a kind of kindness. Weeks set one under another like copy lines, each straight as she could keep it. In her back pocket, the rubbing of the pine knot strokes wore to softness at the folds, graphite finding the paper's nap the way water finds low ground. When the sheriff's report posted at the landing, a single sheet tacked neat, Eliza read it through without chewing any word. Unfortunate misapprehension during wartime conditions. Assembly dispersed. Assets accounted. Unknown remains none. The ferry bell, new rigged, hung innocent on its yoke, bright as if brass had never learned strangers' hands. A child struck it with 2 fingers and laughed at the clear note. The sound went upriver, then came back thinner, as sound does when it has learned something and will not say it. Toward evening she walked the barrens in no hurry and let what could be counted present itself. The stump with the 12 initial cuts had stopped bleeding, resin set like amber beads in a little crown. Ants ran their errands across the reversed letters on her rubbing, a parade without music. At the runnel, where drag marks had dissolved under old water, dust lay unmarked except by lizard tails and the small arabesques of crickets. She noted each absence because absence has its columns too. On a Sunday after Frost failed to appear, Hollis's clerks boxed the 3 iron links and carried them to the courthouse wagon. He signed a receipt in triplicate and tipped his hat toward Dinah's porch. Eliza folded her copybook and slid it under her arm like any old primer. She did not speak to the men. She preferred the work to talk. The reliable pull of pencil, the bite of paper, the satisfying way figures consent to sit in order, even when meaning does not. At dusk, she stood by the pilings one last time and watched the river remember itself, roughened by a breath she could not name, then smoothing as if a hand had been laid on it. No change showed now. The water had taken back its shallow oaths. She tasted bronze at her teeth, though the bell held still. In her bag, the rubbing, button, twine and chalk grit kept the quiet shared by honest tools. The river, untroubled, went about its work.